Their hip presents so hard, they are feeling it in Brazil. Mamma mia, what a KO!
The fight clock is brought to you by Modelo. One of the greatest knockouts you'll ever see.
Incredible. Oh, and down goes Gamboa. Whoop, there it is.
Jakob with a huge highlight tonight.
What up, brawlers? Welcome back to Throwin Hands. It's been a minute since we had a guest. Alex Lee from MMA Fighting's. I invited him to the show a few days ago. He decided to come on. Alex, how you doing?
Hello, hi Jacob. It is. I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here. Happy to share whatever I can with you, sir. Whatever wisdom, whatever thoughts you may need, or lack of wisdom, we'll see. But happy to be on the show. Definitely.
Well, what were your thoughts on this past weekend at 261? It was a crazy night.
Man, I wrote about it a little bit. It almost felt like two separate cards at first. We had like the preliminaries, which had some like kind of screwy judging on it. And as someone who's like covering the card professionally, immediately I'm thinking like, oh, there's something to write about. That'll be our sort of narrative for the week, is kind of the screwy judging. And then we had like the most eventful main card of all time. Horrifying to watch the Chris Weidman injury. I'm a big fan of his. But all three championship fights certainly delivered from a storyline perspective. Shevchenko's dominance, Rose Namajunas. I mean, proving that on her best day, she can beat anybody, which we kind of already knew, but she proved it again. And then Kamaru Usman winning, what seemed like an unnecessary rematch, but he did exactly what he wanted. He said I want to finish it this time. He finished it. So against the odds, he got what he wanted out of it. So yeah, just a really one of the most memorable cards probably of in recent memory.
Now, what are some challenges that go into covering such a large event like this?
Thankfully, I'm part of an amazing team. I mean, the MMA fighting team is ridiculous. We've got Jose Youngs out there. He's been our man on the scene for the last, during the whole pandemic era. He's been the man out there covering all the events. So I don't know how he does it. He's a machine. And Damon Martin, Mike Heck, Stephen Morocco. I'm hoping I'm not going to miss anyone, but we have so many great writers. And then on our social team, Alex Savas, Casey Leiden. So it's an incredible team. Guilherme Cruz, our man in Brazil. But yeah, when you're covering an event live, it's just a matter of, speed is so important, right? Speed is so important with news these days, but you also want to still get it right. But when it comes to fight nights, there's some looseness to it. You have some breathing room. You can always edit after. Thankfully, we live in the internet age now where you can put a story out there, and if there's like a minor, hopefully inconsequential error, you can fix it. But yeah, the challenge is really just figuring out what's relevant. How much do you want to talk about Jake Paul, these days? How many Jake Paul posts do you want to get out of it if he shows up? That's one of the newest challenges we've had lately. So just balancing that sort of thing, figuring out what's relevant in the moment, and just make sure everyone's there to cover it.
Speaking of Jake Paul, 2 weeks ago, Jake Paul, when he knocked out Ben Askren, what do you have any animosity, or I don't think that might not be the right word, covering events like this, freak shows, for lack of a better term, and thoughts on, you see Bloody Elbow and all these other outlets covering him so heavily. And I just can't help but think this guy's not a fighter.
Hey, look, we're not exempt either. I don't know if you've seen MMA fighting over the last 2 weeks. It's all over our front page. We must have, if you average, I'm not saying every day, but on average, if you average how many it's like 2 Jake Paul stories a day. Since or even just leaving a little bit before the Triller Fight Club thing. And look, that's, if we're being honest, this is a a lot of the business is what draws attention, and those stories do big numbers. That's just a fact. We like to be able to balance that with, actual MMA coverage, but obviously there's a lot of heat around this kid's name right now. I have no animosity with having to cover that stuff. I think I have a very sort of libertarian view of combat sports. I think everything's worth covering. If people are interested, then it's worth covering. That's what I say. I don't love covering everything. I don't necessarily love the subject. Like, I think Jake Paul, to put it nicely, is not a good person. Some might say human garbage. So I don't like Jake Paul at all. I'm not against sort of the storylines that he's bringing. I think the stuff is again, it's a little over the top at times, but I do like that it's something fresh to talk about. I like the Triller Fight Club events. I thought it's a nice change of pace. So keep in mind, this is coming from the perspective of someone who covers UFC literally every Saturday. So anything that was a little different, I quite enjoyed. I thought the musical stuff was fun, and the whole concept was good, even if it could have used some trimming of the fat. But yeah, I'll never. I can't remember a time where I was like, oh, I really hated like just covering something. So no, I actually didn't mind that at all.
So we're going back to the beginning of your career. What made you want to get into journalism, cover sports, and cover MMA in general?
I've always been I shouldn't say I've always been a sports fan. I definitely got into it a lot when my teen years. Just everything. Like I'll watch almost everything except surprisingly hockey. I know I'm up here in Canada, but I'm one of the few Canadians. I'm not a huge hockey guy, probably because it coincides with the NBA season, which is more my sport. I'm a huge basketball fan. So, but I love covering sports. I just love the purity of the game. I love the politics around it. I love all aspects of it, everything that needs to be covered, when you're talking about sports. And MMA is so appealing in such a way. One, in my own life, I'm very, I've never been in a real fight in my life. I've trained a little bit, but other than that, I've never been in an actual fight. I'm not a violent person, but I'm fascinated by professional violence, as I think many of us are for whatever reason. It's a young sport, which I like. I like that it has a history, certainly martial arts dating back, centuries, if we go on like jujitsu and just like combat sports in general. But if you're talking about the modern version of MMA as we know it, it's very young. And to me, that's very exciting. I think there's so many avenues of it to explore. I think there's so much room for growth, not just in the media, but the fighters and the athletes are getting better all the time. So that part of it's really exciting. I love how fresh it is. And I like to say we shouldn't be so cynical about it, but you do see a lot of cynicism, both sometimes in the media and in the fan base, but that's more a product of our times than necessarily just MMA.
So you mentioned a good point. MMA is a young sport. Do you like how flexible you can be with covering the sport? Because, you notice how like on MMA fighting, MMA junkie, like it seems like content's a lot more flexible. You can do a lot more with it in that sport rather than baseball. It seems like MMA is like, hey, let's try this and let's do this.
Yeah, that's kind of the beauty of it, right? There's no rules, there's no rules. And that, like, kind of as you mentioned in other sports, that there aren't people trying to do new and exciting things. But when there's been, again, 100 years of coverage of how to cover baseball, 100 years of how to cover hockey, there was some resistance to that sort of thing. Now, I mean, we have conventions in MMA as well, prediction features and aftermaths and, preview shows, which is fine. And that stuff is great. But you're right. There's that room for covering all these kind of different angles. Do you want to focus on technique? Do you want to focus on the matchmaking aspect, the trash talking aspect of it? There's so many cool little details. You want to focus on stars, prospects, over international guys. You want to focus on the Tennessee regional scene. I don't know. There's all this kind of these stories that are still to be told. And again, in every sport, but in MMA, like I said, still so many things are being unearthed. And like you said, that flexibility is what makes it so much fun. The kind of things stories you can propose and kind of ideas you can have. And yeah, it's definitely a great part of covering MMA.
So I'm sure with this flexibility, there's challenges into what you think you're going to cover and what you want to cover. What are some of the biggest challenges you've come across throughout the course of your writing career?
Well, I mean, again, I'm speaking as someone who, I never worked in the print field, right? I'm sort of the, the modern, I don't even necessarily say journalist. If you look at my online profiles, I actually don't put journalist in my profile. I certainly do journalistic work sometimes as far as making calls and doing interviews, but I'm very much a blogger, a blogger who happens to work for a very successful site. I'm happy to be working for MMA Fighting, but I wouldn't consider myself a journalist on the level of, or not the same level, in the same vein as like even my coworker, Steve Morocco. I think he's a more traditional journalist than I am. So if people want to call me a journalist, I'm not against it, but I rarely refer to myself that way. And one of the biggest challenges is sort of what we said about covering Fight Night is that fight for relevancy, is that wanting to tell certain stories, but being aware that, especially when you work for a larger site, you have responsibility to your editor and to your the corporate MMA world as it is. So while I may want to focus on smaller stories and interviews with certain people, I know that is not as valuable to the company that I work for as a Jake Paul tweet, or Conor McGregor tweet storm, or John Jones, John Jones and Francis Ngannou going back and forth on social media, something like that. So finding that room to still tell these sort of vital stories while also again covering more populist stuff. It's a difficult thing to do. And again, I know that's not only in our field, but just in the news in general. And I'm fortunate, like I said, I gain satisfaction from all sides of it. I kind of enjoy trashy stories, but I also enjoy occasionally getting to take deep dives and write compelling sort of profiles out of interviews. So, finding that balance though is very, very difficult.
So you mentioned there's a lot of content to cover, and I'm sure another challenge that you faced was you came to SB Nation about 2013, if I'm not mistaken, from the research I've done.
I would have been probably more close to 2017. I have been writing for. I did get my start with the Bloody Elbow fan section. Now, Bloody Elbow is part of SB Nation, and that would have been around 2013. So yeah, I was doing. I was just writing about the Ultimate Fighter because nobody cared about that show anymore, and I don't blame them. But certainly some of the later seasons, I was like, well, I noticed no one was really doing in-depth recaps anymore. I noticed the general interest was plummeting, but I love that show. And that's sort of one way I got my foot in the door, was just doing it for Bloody Elbow. And Bloody Elbow has a really great fan section for anyone out there who's interested in writing, because if your story gets enough likes, you kind of end up in a little box on the side of the front page of Bloody Elbow. And it's just a great way of getting people who, outside your friends and family to maybe see your work. So yeah, 2013, kind of when I started doing fan posts. And then when I actually became an official staff member of MMA Fighting would have been around 2017.
So you kind of came in at a time where podcasting and video content was starting to rev up, when it, like, freelance stuff like that. What have you seen in the evolution of content, and what challenges I'm sure it's presented a few challenges for you.
I think maybe I'm just being too optimistic. I feel like the kind of podcast content and stuff is getting so just more thoughtful, which is not to say they weren't intelligent podcasters before, but I feel like, and I want to believe this, we're moving away from hot takey people. And I'll say this, I've noticed for the most part in the MMA field, I don't know if we have a version of a Skip Bayless or a Stephen A. Smith, which is kind of what made it so aggravating when Stephen A. Smith has become sort of encroaching on our, we started having new stories about him because he was encroaching on our territory. And I think that's a great thing. And maybe that limits our certain people's ability to break into the mainstream or what have you. I mean, the closest you would come to, people say Ariel Helwani, a former colleague of mine, is sort of kind of a take guy, or like someone who stirs up drama. And I'll never criticize him for that. One, he's a friend of mine, obviously. And two, that's part of the job. That's part of the job, is generating that kind of interest, kind of finding these ways to, draw on the casual viewer and things like that. So, but overall, but he's also a very, very positive person. I consider him to be such a great ambassador for MMA. So again, people may disagree. That's fine. I've always had a lot of respect for his work. And I'm just so glad that I think people are starting to get an audience without having to resort to, again, cheap opinions or inciting I say argument, necessarily inciting fake debates. There's still room for that. There's still an appeal to it, but that I think that we don't rely on that. Like you said, that podcasts and shows don't have to rely on that is such a good thing, and I hope it keeps moving in that direction. There'll always be debate shows. There'll always be hot take people, but I'm glad there seems to be room for moderation.
I like what you said about how there aren't many hot takey people in MMA. And I think maybe you agree with me on this. I think there isn't many because, anybody can step out on the basketball court and play with their friends. Anybody can, go to the soccer field and, play some soccer with their friends, but not everybody can go out there and step in a cage. I think I'm sure you would agree with that take.
Yeah, there has to be a respect for it. Look, there has to be. I know there's a lot of fighters who have a contentious relationship with the media, or at least are critical of how we cover it, and that is their right. But I find writers are pretty respectful, especially if you look at the biggest names. If we're talking about the biggest names, again, like Ariel Helwani, like a John Morgan, again, people from our side, Steve Morocco, Damon Martin, these guys, look, we'll call a spade, but at the same time, we come from a base of respect. We come from a base of we're going to give you your fair shake. If you act a fool, you're going to get called out for it. But that's how it should be. We should be honest with these people, and most fighters respect that, I think. And when you see fighters necessarily complain about the media, it's funny. I normally don't think they're talking about a lot of the bigger outlets. They're talking about maybe some stray story that they saw from some other MMA blogging site. And it's great that everyone can have their opinion, but sometimes it takes only a few to kind of sour the pool, as it were. So, yeah, I don't know. I just am a believer that MMA coverage, for the most part, it's critical, but it's fair. And again, I'm biased because I'm in it, but I do think we're critical and we're fair, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm with Bloody Canvas. Maybe you heard of him, but like
Yep.
I completely agree. Like we're critical, but we're not, going out there like Stephen A. Smith did. Oh, we learned nothing about Conor McGregor. Like, no, we learned. Joe Rogan made the point. We learned that he could finish. We learned he could finish you with a head kick. Like, so we are fair. We're critical, but we can be fair. So we got this fight coming up tomorrow, Reyes versus Prochazka. What does a week look like in prep and like with stories and preparing for a fight like this?
Well, these days it's a little different. There was a time when we would certainly try to go out to cover everything, but obviously during the pandemic time, it's difficult. Both logistical reasons, staffing reasons. There's just more cards than there used to be. It just doesn't necessarily make sense for us from a return standpoint to give every card the same level of attention, if that makes sense. Again, that may sound harsh, but the UFC doesn't either. Let's be honest. Look at how Dana White handles the lead up to like a pay-per-view week, and then how he'll lead up to maybe one of these fight night weeks where you'll barely see him mention that a card is happening until maybe late Friday or early Saturday, or you see him at the weigh-ins, right? So challenges are definitely, again, are there features that we can write ahead of time, beyond just predictions that people might want to read? Who can we get from the card, getting the right interviews out there, because you want to give everyone their shot, but at the same time, there's only so much space, quote unquote, virtual space as there were on your site. You want to focus on certain things. Dealing with the UFC is its own problem. The UFC is not an organization that is helpful with, unless you're an affiliate of the UFC, with helping you kind of get interviews. You have to work through managers and agents. Otherwise, you're kind of working against the UFC in that regard. Though they do a great job, by the way. I think their PR team does a great job with setting up virtual media days, things like that. So in that regard, I give them a lot of credit. But yeah, otherwise, it's just making sure there's enough going on every day, and you're focusing on that event, but also on all the other news that has to be taken care of, plus other organizations. Like you mentioned, it's a UFC fight week. It was also, we had a one championship on Wednesday. We had the PFL back. So now it's really about juggling all these things and figuring out how much do we want to cover of just the UFC, because obviously they're number one. That's what the fans care about, but also being a bit of a tastemaker or a trendsetter of our own right, and shining light on promotions like the PFL and One Championship and Bellator, which aren't small promotions by any means, but obviously don't get the same amount of coverage as the UFC usually.
Now, looking at your profile, you've written a few articles about this week. How do you improve upon your work from week to week or from article to article? Like, do you sit down and talk with your coworkers, or like, do you read it yourself and say, I can make this a little better?
I mean, one, I'm a very, very self-critical person. So I'll definitely, I'm a drafter. I'll definitely do 2 or 3 drafts or something before I send it out. If it's not a breaking news story, yeah, multiple drafts, and definitely just reading the work of other people, man. It's like every time I think I'm good, I'll read something by like a Sean Al-Shadi, by a Chuck Mindenhall, gosh, there's so many people on. Tim Bissell's a great writer, of course, for Bloody Elbow. There's just so many talented writers out there. Dan Tom and MMA Junkie, I think, is very good. Fernando Praches writes just wild stuff for Fan Bite. And every time I think I'm doing good, it's not about comparing yourself to other people. That's a different kind of game and not necessarily you want to do. But absolutely, you can see stuff from your colleagues, and you just see ideas that you're like, oh, that's a good idea. Like, could I write something like that? If you're a hack like me, Jacob, sometimes you just steal stuff. You just steal stuff and you hope nobody notices. You steal a phrase here and there. No, but I do think there's nothing wrong with looking at your peers' work and not being intimidated by it, but understanding why what they're doing is successful. Why is this person considered funny? Why is this person considered a good analyst? Why is this person like a Chuck Mindenhall? Why is he so good at telling a story? What is it he does? So I would always tell people, man, you got to read other people's stuff. You got to keep reading, always be reading. And even non-MMA stuff. I just mentioned MMA writers. There's, 3 dozen writers in other sports that I could name who are I just admire their ability to tell a story, and you just learn from that, and never think that you're the best, because I don't know, Jacob, you might be an amazing writer. I can tell you for myself, I'm probably not amongst the 50 best MMA writers out there. I wouldn't put myself in it. So as long as you keep that mentality, you stay hungry, and you'll always want to be better,
So you kind of have already answered my last question, but what advice would you give to young journalists or people wanting to get into the MMA field to get their foot in the door?
Number one, I guess this is a general life thing, is please just be positive and don't be cynical, and keep your mind as open as you can to ideas and criticism. I was very lucky, Jacob. I was very lucky in how I came up, because I'm not someone who came up working in sports at an early age. So I was kind of already behind a lot of my peers when I decided to get serious about it. I didn't get serious about getting to MMA until my late 20s, early 30s. And I was fortunate. I went to a good program, good sports journalism program, which was very hands-on and led to an internship. And that internship became a part-time job within a year. That part-time job became a full-time job within a year. And that full-time job eventually led me to MMA fighting within the next year. So that's not a common thing to happen. I was very fortunate to get certain breaks, people ahead of me, kind of moving on to other things so I could take their spot and things like that. So I was very fortunate in that regard. But I would tell people, you're going to get a lot of breaks, hopefully, if you're patient. And again, if you're positive and you're open to them, because there's people out there who might be getting breaks and not realizing it. They might see an opportunity and be like, oh, that's not for me. Even though it's presented to them so clearly, but they're just in their mind like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. My goal was to do this. I have a clear goal in mind. This is what I want to do. So for people who are like that, who are driven, that's amazing. And if everything goes your way, that's great. That's how you see some very successful people happen. For some others like myself who didn't quite have as clear a plan, just be open-minded. And if you're going to say no to something, you better have a good reason for it. Otherwise, I say hop on every opportunity and just diversify your interests as much as you can, whether it's MMA, whether you're covering baseball, basketball, field hockey, I don't know, whatever it is, but positive, don't be cynical, and be open-minded, and you'll be fine. It's a lot of hard work, but you'll be fine if you're out there.
Well, Alex, I think that's actually a great note to leave off on. Where can people find you on social media?
Oh, you can find me at Alexander K. Lee on Twitter. I think, am I 1K or 2? Are you looking at it right now? This is
let me take a look.
This is so embarrassing. 1K.
Okay.
At Alexander K. Lee on Twitter. My DMs are open, people. If you have any questions, comments, only nice things. If you will be blocked if it's something rude. Matchmaking suggestions for Mike Heck and our weekly podcast. On to the next one. That's my favorite thing to receive in the DMs. But I've also just received a lot of lovely compliments, and I always welcome them. So yeah, people hit me up on social media. Whatever you need, I'm here.
When are you gonna get that blue check?
I never. I don't think. I had a friend who used to work at Twitter. They couldn't get me a blue check, so. I may have to change my name to the real Alex Lee at some point, but yeah, I don't know what's going on with this blue check thing. They become very stingy. I don't feel like a person until I get one.
Well, Alex, I want to thank you for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. No problem, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you guys next time.